Well, that's bizarre. Hello? That's weird. Am I here?
Hello, Kevin.
Well, hello.
Hopefully you got my email message. I was having some technical difficulties this morning, but everything
Oh,
seems fine now.
oh. What was the technical difficulty?
I couldn't log into the admin account.
Uh-oh. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad I was spared that anxiety. I'm sorry you weren't.
Oh, well, it's all fine now.
Okay, well, good. I'm looking for a poem that I want to use when I introduce Kevin Young.
Sure, you work on that and I'll catch up on the stuff I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Oh, okay, good, good. Uh, Anne, I think was going to tune in about 10 till, so a couple more minutes.
Mhm.
All right. Let's see.
And I'm sorry, we decided that we would not allow participants to unmute themselves, correct?
Well, until the end.
Until the end, and then we'll change
And
that.
that's the way it's usually been handled. Everybody gets muted except the presenters and the host.
Sure. Okay, here goes.
And then people can be invited to use the chat box. And yeah, I think Anne is with us. Welcome. Good morning. Oh, you're muted.
Okay,
Anne.
there. Okay,
You
can
go.
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. A lot of
You
technical.
look like Eric to me, so I muted
Yes.
you.
I know, sorry. I forgot my computer charger, so I'm using my husband's. Yes,
I had issues this morning too, so I'm sure
Yeah.
everything will go very smoothly now.
I hope so. Thank you so much for doing all the heavy
Oh.
lifting.
Oh yeah, Michelle, you've got the heavy load today.
Well, I'll do my best.
Okay, all right. Well, there. I think there's plenty of forgiveness to go all the way around, so don't worry about
Thank you. I appreciate that.
it. So, yeah. Where did that poem go? All right.
So I do have to leave at like 10 at the very latest, but
Sure.
but if there are a lot of questions, you could stay on if you have more time, Kevin.
Sure. Yeah, I have more time. Michelle, can you allow us to run over for a few minutes?
Yes, for a few minutes, I can do that. Like, call it 10.
Yeah, maybe 10 minutes, not more than 10 minutes. We obviously we don't want to crowd the service. Do you have to participate in the service at all?
I do not, but I think we'll want to give folks a break in
Yes.
case they're intending to go to both, but I'm good.
Sure. Okay, that'll be good. All right.
Okay.
All right. I am. Huh. Can't understand where that poem went.
I have days like that.
Yeah, that's really weird. And the book's not indexed in the way that would help me. So, okay. I thought I had it marked, and apparently I didn't.
Are you able to find the pieces?
Yeah. I mean, we settled that up ahead of time.
No, I mean, but do you want to do?
No, this is not right.
So you sent me the link on my email. Did you
No,
find
I
it?
got that. I'm on.
Oh.
I'm just looking for the next thing here. No, that's not right.
You sent me the link for your class on my email, didn't you? Or you did not?
No.
Oh, okay.
I need to get to you and ours.
Okay.
Thing here. All right, hold on. It's time to mute myself.
Let's see, how are we doing? Well, we're accumulating an audience here, it looks like.
And we still have 4 minutes before the start.
Right. Well, I was looking in the wrong book. That's what my problem is. Okay. All right. So Ann, it looks like you go first with the Langston Hughes, huh? You have a, oh, you're muted. And you're muted. Ann, can you unmute yourself? No?
Can't? Okay, here we go. You should be able to now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
All right.
Yes, so I'm going first.
Right. And so I'll go through the usual ritual of lighting the flaming chalice and giving a brief reading.
Okay.
Okay. And it looks like it's about time. So I'll do that. And here's the flaming chalice. And I'll move it aside to make room for poetry. So April is National Poetry Month. And so we are welcoming spring by honoring that occasion. There's probably no time that's not a good time to be reading poetry, but spring certainly is one of those special times. And I'm going to begin with a short reading from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem that sort of sets us up to get ready for poetry. And it's an excerpt from her Song of Winnie, which is a reference to Winnie Mandela, by the way. It's also inscribed in a bronze plaque on the Library Walk in New York City, these words. A poem doesn't do everything for you. You are supposed to go on with your thinking. You are supposed to enrich the other person's poem with your extensions, your uniquely personal understandings, thus making the poem serve you. So Ann and I hope that these poems will serve you, at least some of them, and that you will enjoy these poems or feel edified or some combination of those things. Ann Keniston, most of you know, she's professor of English at UNR and director of undergraduate studies. She has had numerous awards. She's read to us from her own collections, Caution of Human Gestures and other wonderful books. And so Ann actually has our first poem. This morning we are celebrating African-American poets. And many of them you have heard of and some you might not have. So we're going to comfort you with the old and introduce you to the new. And we're beginning with three poets of the Harlem Renaissance. And Ann is going to present the first, Langston Hughes. Ann?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks, Kevin, for inviting me back. It's good to at least see your little squares. And maybe someday I can actually see you guys in person. So that's the hope, right? So the first poem is by Langston Hughes, who in my view is one of the most important of the Harlem Renaissance poets and one of the most important American poets. He's a poet of the Harlem Renaissance. One of the things he did that we'll not see in this poem, but I think is really important, is he brought the blues form, the musical form, into poetry. So bringing a distinctively African-American form into poetry. His poems are famous for the most part for their accessibility. They're kind of, he often writes poems in different voices. And this poem might even qualify as that. It's called The Negro Speaks of Rivers. It's a poem that I think is speaking back to a kind of oracular tradition that is this kind of like disembodied statement. And also probably to Walt Whitman, for whom or to whom he has many poems that are kind of rejoinders, where he's modifying and updating Whitman's expansive view of America. So Hughes actually talks a little bit about the poem in this excerpt that we're going to hear.
This is The Negro Speaks of Rivers, one of my earliest poems written in 1920, just after I came out of high school. The way this poem came to be written was that I was going to Mexico to visit my father, who lived in Mexico City, and on the train going across the Mississippi River just outside St. Louis, I looked out the window and I saw this great muddy river flowing down toward the heart of the South, and I began to think about what this river meant to the Negro people, how, in a sense, our history was linked to this river, how in slavery time my grandmother told me that to be sold down the Mississippi was one of the worst things that could happen to a Negro slave. And then I remembered that I'd read about Abraham Lincoln going down the Mississippi as a young man, and he went on a raft to New Orleans, and he saw human beings bought and sold in the slave market there, and he was so horrified by this that he never forgot it. And many years later, of course, we know that it was Lincoln who signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And so as the train went on into the gathering dusk, because it had been about sunset when we crossed the river, I took my father's letter out of my pocket and began to write down on the back of his letter this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.
So now you know what it means to be sold down the river. We move now to another poet of the Harlem Renaissance, Countee Cullen. Most of the poets we're going to read this morning, we could fill this hour with wonderful poems of. And Ann and I both experienced some pain, I think, in eliminating some of those that we wished we could have read. That certainly counts twice for Countee Cullen. He was born in New York City or Louisville, Kentucky, or maybe somewhere else. We're not quite sure, but certainly by early boyhood, he was in Harlem, where, having lost both parents, and was adopted by Reverend Cullen, who was pastor of the largest congregation in Harlem, the Methodist Episcopal Church, or the Salem Methodist Episcopal Church. Countee Cullen graduated from NYU as only one of 11 Phi Beta Kappa students. He obtained his master's in English at Harvard in 1926 with a focus on the classics, interestingly. And he would, in fact, later translate Euripides from the Greek. And classical references do infuse many of his poems, although not the one we're going to read today. He was writing poems from the age of 18, won prizes in both high school and college, by which time he was already publishing. In one of the contests, however, he placed second to another poet named Langston Hughes, whom they both became avatars of the Harlem Renaissance, as a matter of fact. His first book was entitled Color and contained his most famous poems, For Do I Marvel, which we almost chose to read, Incident, which we will read, or he will, and Heritage. This was published in 1925. Other noteworthy books of his include Black Christ and Other Poems. He actually married the daughter of W.E.B. Du Bois, although that did not last very long. And other figures of the Harlem Renaissance, as long as we're on that topic, included Zora Neale Hurston, Paul Laurence Dunbar, James Weldon Johnson, Claude McKay, Arna Bontemps. And in fact, Arna Bontemps can be found reading the poets of the Harlem Renaissance on at least 2 anthologies of Black poets. You heard Anne refer to the influence of jazz in the poetry of Langston Hughes, and in fact, Duke Ellington was a prominent member of the Harlem Renaissance as well, and collaborated with several of these poets. Countee Cullen's also written an autobiography of his cat. He collaborated with Johnny Mercer on a Broadway musical adaptation of a Bontemps novel, St. Louis Woman. He mentored the young James Baldwin, and he died at 43 in 1946 of renal failure due to hypertensive encephalopathy. So here you're going to hear Tayuna Darris read his poem, Incident. Michelle?
Incident by Countee Cullen. Once riding in old Baltimore, heart filled, head filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean keep looking straight at me. Now I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. This is a good poetry reading by Tayuna T. Darris. Visit us online at www.goodpoetry.org.
And now Anne is going to bring you another Harlem Renaissance poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Anne, you're on mute. Michelle, can you help her? I don't know.
Okay, sorry, I won't mute myself between readings anymore. It's too complicated. So our next poem is by Paul Laurence Dunbar, another poet sort of loosely affiliated with that group of poets. He was born to freed slaves, and the poem that we're going to hear is one of several poems, or at least 2 poems that we are going to be hearing today that's about the sort of image of the caged bird. And I think one thing that we'll see in several of these poems, including the Hughes poem, is that there are often ways of referring to personal and political issues that are somewhat coded. Or I actually just heard a speech talking about kind of double vision in African-American poems. So this is a poem about a caged bird. but it's about the condition of slavery.
You know, people still talk about, I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing.
Yeah.
A movie was made.
Yeah.
It's taught in classrooms. I mean, you can rarely talk. You can rarely talk to anybody in the world and mention Dr. Angelou, and the first thing out of their mouth, I know why the cage bird sing.
Well, that's
why is that bird still singing though?
Well, because the bird sings. That's a poem written by Paul Laurence Dunbar in 1892. The poem is called Sympathy, and I'd like to say this poem to you.
Oh yes.
For you and for your viewers. I know what the caged bird feels on me when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind blows soft through the springing grass and the river floats like a sheet of glass, when the first bird sings and the first bud opes and the faint perfume from its chalice steals. I know what the caged bird feels. I know why the caged bird beats its wing till its blood is red on the cruel bars, for it must fly back to its perch and cling when it fain would be on the bough a swing. And the blood still throbs in the old, old scars. It pulses again with a keener sting. I know why it beats its wing. And I know why the caged bird sings. Ah me. When its wings are bruised and its bosom sore, it beats its bars and would be free. It's not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that it sends from its heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven it flings. I know why the caged bird sings.
Beautiful.
And if I could just add a couple words, that of course was Maya Angelou reading the poem, and we're going to hear, she used that phrase in her first volume of her memoir. We're going to hear her later. Another thing of interest perhaps is that phrase, the heart's deep core, comes from a Yeats poem that's been co-opted.
Well, we're going to see more than one allusion to other poets as we move through these poems this morning. And by the way, I want to thank Michelle Hamilton for doing such an excellent job of these transitions to multiple videos, something I would never be able to do. So, our next poet bridges these Harlem Renaissance poets of, well, as you heard, from the 1890s to the 1930s. And this is Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks is one of 3 Black women to win the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. The other 2 you will also hear from today, Rita Dove and Natasha Trethewey. Brooks was actually the first in 1950. And despite the rich literature produced by the Harlem Renaissance, she was also the first Black person to win the Pulitzer altogether. And this was for her collection called Annie Allen. She would subsequently become poetry consultant to the Library of Congress, which was the predecessor of what we now call the U.S. Poet Laureate. If you're intrigued by our offering today, Song from the Front Yard, you may want to read her most famous poem, We Real Cool. The Children of the Poor is another that you might consider, and Kitchenette Building, all of which can be found online. She taught American literature at the University of Chicago with stints as well at Columbia and City College of New York. Like Countee Cullen, she served a Guggenheim Fellowship in Poetry. She has received the Robert Frost Award and numerous other awards, including induction into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. This quote from her, well, I read her quote from the Song of Winnie, and mentioned that it's on a bronze plaque on the library walkway in New York City. So here is a song from the front yard. Michelle?
A song in the front yard. I've stayed in the front yard all my life. I want to peek at the back, where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of a rose. I want to go in the backyard now and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want a good time today. They do some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. My mother sneers, but I say it's fine how they don't have to go in at 8:45. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman, that George will be taken to jail soon or late. On account of last winter, he sold our back gate. But I say it's fine, honest I do, and I'd like to be a bad woman too, and wear the brave stockings of night black lace and strut down the streets with paint on my face.
Gwendolyn Brooks once complained at a poetry reading that We Real Cool was so frequently and thoroughly anthologized that she wished that editors of anthologies would acknowledge that she had written a few other poems. And so I hope we've paid her appropriate tribute today by reading one of those other poems.
And she's such a wonderful poet in terms of using voices. So that's a poem that is narrated by, I mean, race isn't explicit, but right, someone who wants to be one of a child who doesn't quite understand what it is to be poor, right? So again, that kind of indirection. So the next poem is by Lucille Clifton, who is a more contemporary poet. She just died a few years ago. And she is a poet who wrote many very short poems. Partly, she said, because she had 6 children and she didn't have time to write long poems. So her poems are characteristically very short and very to the point. And again, there's often much more going on than meets the eye. So this poem that we're going to hear read by her daughter, who was also the producer of the film Black Panther, refers to the blessing of the fleet that occurs every year. And it especially commemorates the blessing of the boats in England that were carrying the first English settlers to Maryland in 1633. So this gives the poem, I think, a really different valence because it is a poem whose wish is refracted through what we know about history.
So this poem was written for St. Mary's College of Southern Maryland. Blessing the boats. May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of our understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever, and may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that.
I might add that that was read by Lucille Clifton's daughter, who is a Hollywood producer and director, and I think she produced Black Panther, as a matter of fact. But she's also written a really very moving poem about her mother's death in a hospital in Baltimore, but too long for us to read this morning. So committed it. Oh, well, I think I'm up next, right? So our next poet is Natasha Trethewey, another Pulitzer Prize winner in our lineup here. In her case for Native Guard in 2007. The Native Guard were a contingent of Black Union soldiers stationed on Ship Island, just off the coast of Gulfport, Mississippi, where Natasha Trethewey grew up. She comments, by the way, that she was named when her father was reading War and Peace. In any case, these Black soldiers were guarding Confederate prisoners of war, and their role in the war had been largely lost to history until Natasha Trethewey discovered it and celebrated it in Native Guard. So she weaves their forgotten role in the war into the personal history of her own family, which is the striking thing about this book of poems. She's also the 19th Poet Laureate of the U.S., 2012 to 2016, and among her many honors are a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Grolier Poetry Prize, the Bunting Fellowship at Harvard, the Yale James Weldon Johnson Fellowship in African American Studies, and a Pushcart Prize. She has taught at Emory University, Duke, University of North Carolina, and now is professor of English at Northwestern University. If you're intrigued by the reading today, you might consider some of her other poems available online, including Miscegenation, which we almost read. I think that was Anne's choice. We chose Incident instead because of the obvious allusion to the poem by the same name that you heard earlier by Countee Cullen. That was just something we couldn't resist. So others that are really very striking are History Lesson, which begins as her grandmother taking her photograph on the beach in her bikini as a little girl, and then placing that photograph side by side with a photograph of her grandmother taken years before when she was confined to the colored beach and dressed in a burlap sack. So a very moving poem. So you're about to hear her read Incident, and Michelle, take it away.
Incident. We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened, the charred grass now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil. It seemed the angels had gathered, white men in their gowns. When they were done, they left quietly. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. When they were done, the men left quietly. No one came. Nothing really happened. By morning, all the flames had dimmed. We tell the story every year.
So quite a dramatic difference from the earlier poem of the same title. Yeah, the kind of directness of it. Trethewey is a wonderful formalist. and we hear her using repetition. Many of the poems in Native Guard, there's a sequence of sonnets that are interlocking sonnets. So we're going to jump back in time a little bit now to Robert Hayden, who, and this is really one of my very favorite poems in the world. He was, well, he graduated from high school in 1932, so he's definitely from an earlier time than Natasha Trethewey, who's still not that old. This is a poem that is, that Hayden wrote many kinds of poems in many kinds of forms, and he wrote many directly political poems. He has a very famous poem about a lynching. He has a poem about Frederick Douglass. So much more public-facing poems. This poem is autobiographical about what seems to be his own childhood. He grew up in Detroit. This is a poem, I mentioned the sonnet, that is actually 14 lines long, the length of a sonnet, but it's not a poem that has a regular rhyme scheme or meter. But it is a poem that is remarkable for its use of sound, its repeated sounds, its echoing sounds. It's also a poem that has a lot of different kinds of tones in it. So it starts out very humbly and narratively, and then by the end, it moves to this much more abstract and very beautiful ending. So the poem chronicles just the speaker's memory of his father looking back at his childhood at a ritual that his father performed, and then looking at it again from an adult. So here he is reading his poem.
Here is a poem that comes directly out of my boyhood in Detroit, and it's called Those Winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made bank fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the coals splintering breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the coal, and polish my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices?
That is a stunning last line. I must say, one worth remembering, and certainly remembering Robert Hayden for. So, our next poet is one who is always entertaining, Nikki Giovanni. She was born in Tennessee, grew up in Cincinnati and a little bit in Wyoming, pardon me. She graduated in history with honors from Fisk University and has studied graduate studies at Columbia and University of Pennsylvania. She's taught at Ohio State, City University of New York, and Rutgers, and is currently distinguished professor at Virginia Tech, where she gave the address the morning after the massacre, the mass shooting at Virginia Tech. She's received image awards from the NAACP 7 times for 7 different collections of poetry. She's also received the Langston Hughes Award, the Hill Visiting Professorship at the University of Minnesota. She's been Woman of the Year Award at 3 different magazines. She earned a 2004 Grammy for a Best Spoken Word. She's had 2 Rosa Parks Woman of Courage Awards, the Maya Angelou Lifetime Achievement Award. She's published 21 collections of poems. Most recently in 2020, Make Me Rain. And then she has a equally prolific list of collections of essays and children's books. Her story about meeting Rosa Parks is hilarious and involved asking a white man to give up his seat so she could sit next to Miss Parks and talk to her. So here is her wonderfully fanciful poem, Kidnap Poem. Play it, Michelle.
Ever been kidnapped by a poet? If I were a poet, I'd kidnap you, put you in my phrases and meter you to Jones Beach, or maybe Coney Island, or maybe just to my house. Lyric you in lilacs, dash you in the rain, blend into the beach to complement my sea. Play the lyre for you, ode you with my love song, anything to win you. Wrap you in the red, black, green, show you off to mama, yeah. If I were a poet, I'd kidnap you.
One thing I would add about Nikki Giovanni that I just think is so cool is that she actually had the shooter in her class, and in her creative writing class, and she reported him because she knew that there was something very wrong with him. So those of us who teach creative writing were just cheering for her. She spoke out ahead of time. So we're gonna now turn back to Maya Angelou, to her own poem, Caged Bird. And I think it's interesting. So this was published in 1983. She was very involved in the civil rights movement. She was the Northern coordinator of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She worked with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. She also was, I believe this was the first time the inaugural poem was revived. It had sort of gone quiescent since Robert Frost did it for Kennedy. So she was the inaugural poet for Bill Clinton in 1993. And here's another poem that is talking about confinement, but maybe more than the earlier poem, it's contrasting the caged bird with the free bird. So this is her reading that poem.
You know, we all have the same words at our disposal, a dictionary full of them. Freedom.
A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the currents end.
And dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dare to claim the sky.
But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage.
His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing.
The free bird thinks of another breeze.
And the trade winds soft through the sighing trees.
And the fat worms waiting on the dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own.
But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, and his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream.
His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing.
The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still.
And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom.
Well, a clear allusion to the 1892 Paul Laurence Dunbar poem. So, Anne, are you still with us?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. So our next poem is by Kevin Young, one of my favorite poets. He currently teaches at Emory University, creative writing and English. And one of the things I love about Kevin Young is that although many of his poems do speak to the Black experience, they range far wider, and in particular embracing the same Spanish poets that I love. There are a great many poems that we wish we could have featured by Kevin Young that we cannot. The one you're about to hear is, in fact, one of his many food poems. This one is Ode to Gumbo, and unfortunately, I was not able to find the text online to provide to you, but I think you'll enjoy it anyway. And notice the way in which rather profound concerns somehow blend into the ingredients of gumbo. Michelle?
Okay, this is called Ode to Gumbo. Someone knows what gumbo is. Y'all know what gumbo is? Do I need to explain it? Gumbo is a stew. Okay, Ode to Gumbo. For weeks, I have waited for a day without death or doubt. Instead, the sky set afire or the flood filling my face. A stubborn drain nothing can fix. Every day, death. Every morning, death. And every night and evening. And each hour, a kind of winter. All weather is unkind. Too hot or cold that creeps the bones. Father, your face, a faith I can no longer see. Across the street, a dying, yet still standing tree. So why not make a soup of what's left? Why not boil and chop something outside the mind? Let us welcome winter for a few hours, even in summer. Some say gumbo starts with filet or with roux, begins with flour and water, making sure not to burn. I know gumbo starts with sorrow, with hands that cannot wait but must, with okra and a slow boil and things that cannot be taught, like grace. Done right, gumbo lasts for days. Done right, it will feed you and not let go. Like grief, you can eat and still plenty left. Food of the saints, gumbo will outlast even us. Like pity, you will curse it and still hope for the wing of chicken bobbed up from below. Like God, gumbo is hard to get right, and I don't bother asking for it outside my mother's house. Like life, there's no one way to do it, and 100 ways from here to Sunday to get it dead wrong. Save all the songs. I know none, even this, that will bring a father back to his son. Blood is thicker than water under any bridge, and gumbo thicker than that. It was my father's mother who taught mine how to stir its dark mirror. Now it is me who wishes to plumb its secret depths. Black angel, Madonna of the shadows, Hail Mary, strong and dark as dirt. Gumbo scent fills this house like silence and tells me everything has an afterlife given enough time and the right touch. You need okra, sausage, bones of a bird, an entire onion cut open and wept over, stirring cayenne in till the end burns the throat, till we can amen and pretend such fiery mercy is all we know. Thanks.
Kevin Young, by the way, has a wonderful, has been the poetry editor of The New Yorker, and The New Yorker has a wonderful poetry podcast where Kevin Young interviews poets. They read the visiting poet chooses a poem from The New Yorker, they discuss it, and then the poet reads a poem of their own that's related. So it's really wonderful, and Kevin Young is just a fabulous interviewer. He actually was just named to be the director of the African American Museum in DC. He's always done administrative work on the side. He was the director of the Schomburg Center, which is a African American archive in New York. So that's a pretty nice gig for him.
Many memorable lines from that poem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like God, hard to get right.
Yeah, and the way that the poem kind of merges celebration and grief makes it sort of a nice segue to our next poem, which is a poem by a younger poet named Ross Gay. Ross Gay lives in Indiana, and he works, as I think you'll get some evidence from in the excerpt that we're going to play, in a community garden that informs much of his poetry. I actually heard him read when I was in Arizona, and I was working in the poetry library the next day, and every single person who walked in was just ecstatic at having heard him read. These are poems that are so joyous, and I think it's worth talking about what has been called Black joy as a kind of political mode. Many of the poems we've heard are poems that are poems of protest and grief. But I think this is a really important mode in contemporary poetry. And as I say, it's really seen as a kind of political mode that African Americans don't have to just be grieving all the time, that joy is really important. So this is an excerpt from the title poem of his book, A Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. It's a super long poem. So even though we don't like to excerpt poems, I think this poem takes like 20 minutes to read. So this is just to give you a little taste of it. So hopefully it's a slightly self-contained excerpt from the middle of the poem.
Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. Friends, oh, dear ones, for I think this might go long. I can't stop my gratitude, which includes, dear reader, you for staying here with me, for moving your lips just so as I speak. Here is a cup of tea. I have spooned honey into it. And thank you, the tiny bee's shadow perusing these words as I write them. And the way my love talks quietly when in the hive. So quietly, in fact, you cannot hear her, but only notice barely her lips moving in conversation. Thank you, what does not scare her in me, but makes her reach my way. Thank you, the love she is, which hurts sometimes. And the time she misremembered elephants in one of my poems, which, oh, here they come. Garlanded with morning glory and wisteria blooms, trombones all the way down to the river. Thank you, the quiet in which the river bends around the elephant's solemn trunk, polishing stones, floating on its gentle back, the flock of geese flying overhead. And to the quick and gentle flocking of men, to the old lady falling down on the corner of Fairmount and 18th, holding patiently with the softest parts of their hands her cane and purple hat, gathering for her the contents of her purse and touching her shoulder and elbow. And thank you to the cockeyed basketball court on which, in a half-court 3-on-3, we old heads made of some little runny-nosed kids a shambles. And the 61-year-old, after a flipping or reverse layup off a backdoor cut from my no-look pass to seal the game, ripped off his shirt and threw punches at the gods and hollered at the kids to admire the pacemaker's scar grinning across his chest. Thank you, the glad accordion's wheeze in the chest. Thank you, the bagpipes. Thank you to the woman barefoot in a gaudy dress for stopping her car in the middle of the road and the tractor trailer behind her and the van behind it, whisking a turtle off the road.
And there's more where that came from.
and more before it. But what a wonderful image of helping an elderly woman up off the street. Such a contrast to the attack that we saw in New York of the Asian woman and those who failed to help her. So this is the other side of that human coin, I think. So our next one is, I think you will be similarly excited by. It's certainly an excitable and excited poem by Danez Smith, whose pronouns are they and them. They are a performance artist who also writes poetry. They were born in St. Paul, Minnesota, graduated from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Don't Call Us Dead. Their first book of poems was a finalist for the National Book Award. Smith is a 2011 Individual World Poetry Slam finalist and reigning two-time Rust Belt Individual Champion. They were awarded a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation, which publishes the Poetry magazine. And winner of the Pushcart Prize again. Their work has been featured on BuzzFeed, the PBS NewsHour, the New York Times Poetry magazine itself, and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And here is their performance of Dinosaurs in the Hood. Play it again, Michelle.
Let's make a movie called Dinosaurs in the Hood. Jurassic Park meets Friday meets The Pursuit of Happiness. There should be a scene where a little black boy is on the bus playing with a toy dinosaur, then looks out the window and sees a T-Rex, because there has to be a T-Rex, dumb motherfucker. It's a dinosaur movie. What the shit did you think was gonna happen? Oh my God. Don't let Tarantino direct this. In his version, the boy plays with a gun. The metaphor being black boys toy with their own lives, the spitting image of his father, the foreshadow to his end. Fuck that. The kid is playing with a plastic triceratops or brontosaurus, and this is his proof of magic or God or Santa or some weird, freaky lizard Jesus Saint Nick shit. I don't know. I want a scene where a cop car gets pooped on by a pterodactyl. I want a scene where a corner store turns into a battleground, but please don't let the Wayans brothers in this movie. I don't want any racist shit about Asian people or overused pan-Latino stereotypes. This is a movie about a neighborhood of royal folks, the children of slaves and immigrants and addicts and exiles saving their town from real-ass dinosaurs. I don't want some cheesy yet progressive, sexy Vietnamese hot dude hero with a funny yet strong black girl buddy cop film. This is not a vehicle for Will Smith and Sofia Vergara. I want grandmas, real-ass grandmas on the front porch taking out raptors with the guns they hid in the walls and under mattresses. I want Cecily Tyson to make a speech, possibly two. I want some of those little spitty, screamy dinosaur things to go. I want Viola Davis to save the town in the last scene with a black fist afro pick through the last dinosaur's long, scaled neck. And this can't be a black movie. No, this movie can't be dismissed because of its cast or its audience. This movie can't be a metaphor for black people and extinction. This movie can't be about race. This movie can't cause black people pain or be about black pain. This movie can't be about a long history of having a long history with hurt. This movie can't be about race. Nobody can say nigga in this movie who can't say it to my face in public. No chicken jokes in this movie. No bullet holes in the heroes. And nobody kills the black boy. And nobody kills the black boy. And nobody kills the black boy for once. For once, nobody kills that black boy. Besides, the only reason I want to make this is for the first scene anyway. That little black boy on the bus with his toy dinosaur, his eyes wide and endless, his dreams possible and pulsing and right there.
So I just want to, that was beautiful, by the way. I just want to let you know that it's 4 minutes till.
Great.
Well, I think we have time for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize winner, Jericho Brown. Anne?
I'm going to actually say, I just think that's such a great note to go out on. This is a great poem and I encourage you guys to read it. But I just think it'll take us down from that kind of high of the last.
Okay, so
poem.
We're ahead.
It's more of a serious downer, more formal poem.
Okay.
And I think that Danez Smith is just such a great performer, and that poem, I love it. I love hearing the audience respond. So that really is a taste of the kind of performance poetry mode that Smith came up in. And what's interesting is that they are combining, this kind of performative mode with poems on the page. And these poems work very well on the page as well. But maybe we could see if anyone has any comments or questions in our last couple minutes.
Sure, Michelle, unmute the audience and we can take some questions. Let's see.
Everybody should be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay.
great. Or if people want to put questions in the chat or comments.
And there is one question. Will you furnish us a list of the poets and poems you featured?
So Nancy Ann, are you on the email list for Sunday Forum? Because yesterday, I did send out the text of all of the poems except Ode to Gumbo.
Dude.
It might be in your email inbox. And by the way, anyone who is not on the email list and would like to be, just let me know at fkevinmurphymd@hotmail.com. I'll be glad to add you. Any other questions?
Well, this is Mary Lee. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you. You know, in the midst of all that's going on in this country, poetry expresses itself so eloquently and so beautifully, and it puts us in a different mindset. And I really appreciate this forum today. Thank you.
Well,
Thanks.
you're welcome. I want you to know, Anna and I worked really hard on this one.
Yeah, and just the kind of compression. I mean, there's so many poems being written about what's going on right now, including by Danez Smith and Jericho Brown and many, many poets. So I encourage you to just take a look at, yeah, the poem "Don't Call Us Dead" by Danez Smith is really an elegy to young Black men who've been killed, and a kind of fantasy of them all being alive somewhere where they are safe. So there's so much to explore. And in addition to the New Yorker Radio Hour, let me recommend the Poetry Foundation webpage. So that is a webpage that has many poems. You can explore more poems by these poets. There are audio recordings. And the nice thing about a webpage like that is it makes suggestions. So like, oh, you like this poem? Here, read that poem. So you can kind of get lost in a pleasurable sense, as opposed to, say, watching, you know, creepy YouTube videos. Yeah.
Well, very good. So let me take this pause just to mention that I was going to mention what's coming up in 2 weeks, and all of a sudden it has escaped me. What is it? Well, I know in 4 weeks, Elliot Parker is going to be speaking about economic disparities, and now it has come back to me. In 2 weeks, Karen Gedney, whom some of you know as the longtime prison doctor at the penitentiary in Carson City, who has written a book about that experience, will be talking together with John Wilson on the prison system and its failings, and how justice could be improved. So stay tuned for those two, and more to follow.
I've just put my information. I've received a grant from the Nevada Arts Council, and I'm giving a culminating reading for that grant. I'm writing about Western land art. So if anyone's interested in attending that, it's a Zoom reading. I don't have the link with me right now, but if you email me, I'd be happy to send it, and I will also send it to Kevin. But I'd love to see some of you there. This has been a 2-year project. So yeah.
So that announcement and email contact for Anne is in the chat box, and I will send out her announcement later today also.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. This has been really nice to share this work with you, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Anne.
Sure, my pleasure. It's, as I say, it's great to be back.
Any other comments or questions? And I want to thank Michelle, who did an outstanding job of,
Yes.
queuing up all of these videos. I felt guilty when I gave her that task, but she was up to it and did a wonderful job. So very good, and including the ones that had to be queued up from the middle of a.
Right.
So, thank you, Michelle, and I almost called you Sam.
Well, you are very welcome, and I'm so glad I was able to attend because I found the selection of poems to be absolutely amazing and moving. So thank you for working so hard to put this together.
Good, good.
Good.
And,
All right.
and
I have to run. So take care, everybody. Hope I get to see you in real life soon.
bye-bye. And thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. And happy birthday to Jenny Kersey, who this past week turned older than I am.